All right, so let's dive into this question, right? This age-old question.
Okay.
Does God choose our spouse?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we?
Yeah.
You've sent over some really thought-provoking religious texts and some podcast notes for this deep dive, and it's clear that this topic is really important to you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even with all the modern ways that we have to find love, dating apps and all that stuff,
Right.
this question of fate
Yeah,
versus free will
absolutely.
in relationships
Yeah,
really keeps us up at night.
absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't love a little divine intervention in the
Exactly.
love department?
Right.
But
Sure.
before we get ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Genesis 2.18
Great.
says, "It is not good for man to be alone."
Right.
Companionship seems pretty fundamental, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But that was before the whole apple incident,
Right.
back when things in the Garden of Eden were, shall we say, a bit simpler.
Simpler, yeah.
Things got a lot more complicated after the fall.
Yeah.
But this deep yearning for connection,
Yeah.
that stayed hardwired into us.
Right, so no more solo picnics in paradise.
Yeah.
But does that mean that there's only one perfect person out there for each of us?
Right.
Like a cosmic soulmate predestined just for us?
Okay.
What do the sources say about that?
Well, the idea of a soulmate
Yeah,
is definitely romantic.
sure.
But these sources frame it a
Okay.
bit differently. It's
Okay.
less about finding the one
Okay.
and more about finding someone who helps us grow closer to God
Okay.
and experience joy.
Mm-hmm.
God knows who would be best suited
Right.
for that journey with us.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like a forced match.
Okay.
We still have choices to make, paths to choose.
That takes some of the pressure off, doesn't it?
I think so.
No more searching for that one needle in the haystack.
Right.
But what about seeking guidance?
Okay.
Do the sources talk about the role of prayer in finding a spouse?
The podcast notes you shared actually talk about praying for alignment with God's will.
Okay.
It's less about asking for a specific person
Uh-huh.
and more about asking God to prepare our hearts
Okay.
for the right relationship, whenever that may be.
So less about a spouse delivery service
Sure.
and more about getting our own hearts in the right place.
Yeah.
Which makes me think about the whole patience thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that these sources touch on?
Patience is a major theme here.
Okay.
It's like refining a precious metal.
Okay.
Waiting can be the fire that removes impurities,
Uh-huh.
leading to a stronger, more beautiful bond in the end.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Patience isn't exactly my superpower,
Sure.
but I can see how rushing things could backfire,
Of course.
especially in something as important as marriage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of preparation,
Okay.
the podcast episode raises a really important point.
Okay.
Are we becoming the type of person
Yeah, okay.
God desires for our future spouse?
So it's not just about waiting around for someone to show up.
Right.
It's about actively working on our own spiritual growth.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what does a godly relationship actually look like according to these sources?
The podcast episode brings up Ephesians 5.25,
Okay.
where marriage is compared to Christ's relationship with the church.
Wow, that's setting a pretty high bar.
It is.
What are the implications of that comparison?
Well, think about how Christ loves the church.
Okay.
It's a self-sacrificing, unwavering love
Mm-hmm.
that seeks the good of the other.
Uh-huh.
It's a love that's committed,
Okay.
forgiving, and constantly striving for unity.
Right.
This passage suggests that marriage at its core
Yeah.
is about reflecting that same kind of love.
That puts things in perspective.
It does.
It's not just about warm, fuzzy feelings.
Right.
It's about making a covenant, putting God at the center,
Yeah.
and letting that shape how we relate to our partner.
Absolutely.
No wonder these sources emphasize taking our time and making sure we're choosing wisely.
Yeah, you don't want to rush into something like that,
Definitely not.
especially when you're talking about forever.
Right.
You know.
Yeah,
It's a big deal.
absolutely. So
Yeah, okay.
take your time.
For sure.
Be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back. So before the break,
Yeah.
we were talking about trusting God's timing
Mm-hmm.
and how it can be tough to wait for his plan to unfold, especially when it comes to something as personal as finding a spouse.
You're right. It's not always easy.
Mhm.
That's why I'm excited to dig into those biblical love stories you mentioned. You said they weren't your typical fairy tales.
Right.
And I'm all about uncovering those unexpected twists and turns. What story are we starting with?
Well, we already touched on Sarah and Hagar.
Okay.
So let's unpack that one a bit more. Talk about a powerful example of what can happen when we try to force God's hand.
It really is. Here's Sarah. desperate for a child,
Right.
and she convinces her husband Abraham to have a child with Hagar, her servant. Talk about a plan backfiring.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? And it highlights how, even with good intentions, our human attempts to control the situation,
Yeah.
to speed up God's timeline,
Right.
can have those unintended consequences.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that his ways are higher than our ways.
Absolutely. Sarah doubted God's promise, and her impatience led to jealousy, rivalry, and a lot of pain for everyone involved. It makes me wonder, though, about the societal pressures on women, especially back then, to bear children. Do you think that played a role in Sarah's actions?
That's a great point. We can't discount the cultural context of these stories. The pressure to produce an heir
Yeah.
must have been immense.
Yeah.
And it's understandable that Sarah felt desperate. But the story ultimately emphasizes the importance of trusting God's timing
Right.
and surrendering our desires to his will,
Yeah.
even when it's hard.
It's a good reminder that even those considered heroes of faith,
Mm-hmm.
like Sarah, wrestled with doubt and made mistakes, it makes those stories feel so much more relatable, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It shows us that we're all on a journey. And even when we stumble, God's grace is there to meet us.
Okay, so we've talked about the dangers of impatience. What about a love story where patience and trusting God's timing really paid off?
Well, in that case, we have to talk about Isaac and Rebekah.
Okay.
Now, that's more of a classic love story, wouldn't you say?
Definitely we see Abraham determined to find a godly wife for his son Isaac,
Right.
sending his servant on a mission, and the details, the prayer, the journey, the meeting at the well. It's also romantic.
It's a beautiful picture of how God can orchestrate those divine appointments,
Yeah,
even when it seems impossible.
yeah.
Even though Isaac and Rebekah had never met, God was working behind the scenes to bring them together.
And it shows how important it is to seek God's guidance in choosing a spouse.
Absolutely.
Abraham wasn't just looking for any woman for Isaac. He wanted someone who would uphold their family's faith and values.
That's a powerful lesson for us today, isn't it?
Yeah.
We might be tempted to settle for someone who looks good on paper, or who checks all the boxes on our list. But it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
It's about seeking a partner who shares our deepest values,
Mm-hmm.
who will challenge us to grow in our faith,
Right.
and who will support us on our journey with God.
Okay, so we've got a story of impatience and a story of trusting God's timing. What other kind of love story can we find in the Bible?
Well, how about one that's a bit more complicated, full of twists and turns, and some might even say a bit messy? Let's talk about Jacob, Rachel, and Leah.
Okay.
We've got deception, rivalry, and family drama galore.
Oh, yeah. This one's a roller coaster. So Jacob falls head over heels for Rachel.
Right.
But her father tricks him into marrying Leah first.
Talk about a bait and switch.
Yeah.
And then there's the competition between the sisters for Jacob's affection.
Mm.
It's messy, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it reveals a lot about human nature and the complexities of relationships.
What I find fascinating is that even amidst all the drama, God is still working. He uses Jacob's experiences to build a nation, even though it wasn't always pretty.
That's right.
It's a reminder that God can use even our flawed choices, our messy situations, for his ultimate purpose.
It's a powerful message of grace, isn't it?
Yeah.
God doesn't just work through perfect people and picture perfect situations.
Right.
He can take our mistakes, our heartbreaks, and weave them into his grand design.
And it shows that even flawed individuals can be used by God for his purposes. None of these characters were perfect, but God still works through their lives in extraordinary ways.
Yeah, they're all human,
Yeah.
just like us.
Right.
They make mistakes, they have flaws,
Yeah.
they experience doubt, and yet God still uses them
Mm-hmm.
to accomplish his purposes.
It's encouraging.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we don't have to have it all figured out
Right.
to be used by God. He meets us where we are,
Yeah.
and he can use our stories, even the messy chapters,
Mm-hmm.
to bring about his glory.
Okay, I have to ask about the Song of Solomon. It's a love story that doesn't hold back on passion and intimacy. How does that fit into the discussion?
The Song of Solomon is a beautiful poetic celebration of the love between a husband and wife,
Okay.
filled with vibrant imagery and symbolism. It reminds us that physical attraction and intimacy are gifts from God to be enjoyed and cherished within the covenant of marriage.
It's a refreshing perspective, especially in a culture that often distorts or trivializes intimacy.
Right.
It's not something to be ashamed of or hidden away,
Exactly.
but something to be celebrated as a beautiful expression of love within a committed relationship.
Absolutely. And it points to the depth of love and commitment that can exist between a husband and wife.
Okay.
A love that's passionate, playful, and deeply fulfilling.
What I love about all of these biblical love stories, even the messy ones, is how they point to the truth that God is intimately involved in our relationships. He's not some distant observer. He's a loving father who cares about every detail of our lives,
Yes.
including our desires for love and companionship.
He's a good father, and he wants good things for us. And sometimes the best things come through waiting and trusting in his timing.
Right.
So yeah, he's definitely involved.
He's a master weaver who takes the threads of our lives,
He is.
even the tangled and broken ones,
Yeah.
and creates a tapestry that's more beautiful than we could have ever imagined.
Absolutely. More beautiful and more intricate than we could ever come up with on our own.
These stories are such a powerful reminder that we're not alone in this journey of finding love. God is with us every step of the way, guiding us,
Yes.
protecting us, and cheering us on.
And even when we make mistakes or face challenges, he's right there to pick us up, dust us off, and set us back on the right path.
Yeah.
His love is unwavering, and his grace is always sufficient.
So let's take these lessons from Scripture to heart
Yeah.
and approach our relationships with faith, hope, and a whole lot of trust in God's perfect plan.
Beautifully said. But before we get too carried away with these beautiful love stories, I think it's important to acknowledge that not all relationships have fairy tale endings. Some relationships, even those that start with the best intentions, don't last.
Right. And while these biblical examples focus on successful marriages, we can't ignore the reality that some relationships end in heartbreak or divorce.
Yeah, that's part of life.
It's a difficult truth to face, but it's important to acknowledge it.
But even in those difficult situations,
Yeah.
God's grace is sufficient. He can heal our wounds, restore our hope, and lead us to a place of wholeness and peace.
It's a reminder that God's love for us isn't contingent on our relationship status. He
Right.
loves us unconditionally, whether we're single, married, divorced, or widowed.
Exactly. His love is constant,
Yeah.
and it's not based on our performance or our circumstances.
And his plans for us are still in motion, even when our circumstances change. He can redeem any situation and bring beauty from ashes.
He's a redeemer.
Yeah.
He can take what's broken and make it beautiful again.
So even if our love story hasn't unfolded the way we expected, we can still trust that God is working all things together for our good.
Absolutely. We have that promise from Romans 8:28
Mm-hmm.
that he works all things together for good for those who love him.
We can hold on to that hope, even in the midst of heartbreak.
Absolutely. Because even heartbreak can be used by God to draw us closer to him,
Yeah.
to teach us valuable lessons,
All right.
to shape us into the people he created us to be.
Now, we've been focusing on romantic love, but I think it's important to acknowledge that God's design for relationships extends far beyond marriage.
It does.
He created us for community, for connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need healthy friendships,
Yes.
family connections, and supportive mentorships.
Right.
These relationships are vital to our well-being
Yeah.
and can be just as fulfilling and life-giving as romantic partnerships.
They can offer companionship, encouragement, accountability, and a sense of belonging, and they can enrich our lives in countless ways.
It's true. And sometimes we can get so focused on finding that one romantic relationship that we neglect these other important relationships.
Yeah.
But God created us for community. And these non-romantic relationships are essential for our growth and our well-being.
I'm curious, though, what are some practical ways we can cultivate healthy relationships, both romantic and platonic? What are some key ingredients that make relationships thrive?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore when we come back after the break.
Sounds good. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've talked about biblical love stories, the importance of trusting God's timing, and even how those principles apply to singleness and other types of relationships. Now, let's shift gears and talk about how all of this plays out in the real world. How do we practically navigate the sometimes confusing world of dating?
That's a great question, and I think it's important to start by reframing how we think about dating instead of approaching it with a sense of pressure, like it's a race to the finish line of marriage. What if we embraced it more as a journey of discovery?
I love that less pressure, more adventure. It takes some of that weight off, for sure. Exactly.
It's about connecting with people, having genuine conversations, and allowing God to lead us wherever that may be. It's not just about finding a spouse, it's about building meaningful relationships, whether those become romantic or not.
Okay, so let's say we're ready to embark on this adventure. Where do we even begin? What practical steps can we take?
First things first, get clear on your non-negotiables. These are the values, beliefs, and lifestyle choices that are essential for you in any relationship. What are the things you absolutely cannot compromise on?
This is about getting real with ourselves, right? Not just focusing on superficial preferences, but digging deeper into those core values that really shape who we are and who we want to become.
Exactly. It's like building a house. You need a
Mm.
strong foundation before you can add the fancy decor.
Solid foundation check. But let's be honest, sometimes the hardest part is just putting ourselves out there. Where do we even go to meet people? I
Yeah.
mean, gone are the days of bumping into your soulmate at the grocery store, right?
Well, maybe not entirely, but I hear you be intentional about where you're spending your time. If you're looking for
Mm.
someone who shares your faith, get involved in church activities or join a Bible study group, volunteer for a cause you're passionate about. Put yourself in environments where you're likely to meet like-minded people.
It's about aligning our actions with our desires, right? We can't just sit at home and expect God to drop a spouse on our doorstep. We have to be actively pursuing opportunities to connect with others.
That's a great way to put it. And once you're in those environments, don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zones, strike up conversations, accept invitations, and be open to meeting new people. You never know who you might connect with or what doors God might open.
Okay, so church volunteering, maybe even that random coffee shop down the street, but what about the elephant in the room, online dating? It's become so prevalent, but it can be a bit daunting to say the least. What are your thoughts on navigating that world?
Online dating definitely has its pros and cons, but I think it's a tool that can be used wisely. The key is to approach it with the same intentionality and discernment that we would bring to any other form of meeting people.
So no mindless swiping or getting lost in a sea of profiles.
Exactly. Start by choosing a platform that aligns with your values and relationship goals. Some sites are geared toward casual dating, while others focus on more serious relationships. Be clear on what you're looking for and choose accordingly. And once you're on a platform, be authentic in your profile. Use recent photos, be honest about your interests and what you're looking for, and let your personality shine through.
Right. No need to pretend to be someone we're not. Authenticity is key,
Yeah.
but there's so much pressure to have the perfect profile picture or write the wittiest bio. It can be intimidating. Any tips for navigating that?
Don't overthink it. Just be yourself. Think about what makes you unique, what you're passionate about, and let that come through in your profile. People are drawn to genuine connection, not curated perfection. And once you start connecting with people, be discerning, pay attention to red flags, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to move on if something doesn't feel right. It's about honoring yourself and your values.
So it's about using wisdom and discernment just like in any other area of life. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. You've met someone online or maybe through a mutual friend, and now it's time for the first date. Any tips for making that a little less nerve-wracking?
Keep it simple. Choose a casual setting like a coffee shop or a walk in the park where you can have a conversation and get to know each other without too much pressure. And remember, it's a two-way street. Ask questions, listen attentively, and be genuinely interested in getting to know the other person.
It's not just about trying to impress them, it's about truly connecting and seeing if there's a spark.
Exactly. And most importantly, pray for God's guidance throughout the entire dating process. Ask Him to give you wisdom, discernment, and peace.
That's such a crucial reminder. It's not just about finding someone who checks all the boxes on our list. It's about seeking God's will and trusting His timing.
And even if a date doesn't lead to a second date, it's not a failure. It's an opportunity to learn to grow and to refine what you're looking for in a partner.
That's a healthy perspective. It's all part of the journey.
Speaking of journeys, let's talk about something that can be a bit tricky to navigate: physical boundaries.
This is important. What are your thoughts on setting healthy boundaries in dating?
It's crucial to have clear boundaries, both for yourself and the other person. This shows respect, protects your heart, and honors God. It's about making wise choices that align with your values and your relationship goals.
So, what might those boundaries look like practically?
It varies from person to person, but it could involve things like avoiding spending the night together early in the relationship, setting limits on physical touch, and choosing activities that don't put you in compromising situations.
Right. It's about being proactive and making those decisions ahead of time rather than waiting until you're in the heat of the moment.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to communicate those boundaries clearly and respectfully. If someone pressures you to cross those lines, that's a red flag.
So, it's about knowing our worth and standing firm in our convictions even when it's hard.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about navigating difficult things, we have to address the emotional side of dating. It can be a roller coaster, can't it?
Oh, for sure. The highs, the lows, the uncertainties. It can be a lot to handle. What advice do these sources give about navigating those emotional ups and downs in a healthy way?
First and foremost, guard your heart. Don't invest too much too soon. Take time to get to know someone before you give them your whole heart.
It's about pacing ourselves and not getting swept away by emotions too quickly, right?
Right, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new connection, but taking things slowly
Mm.
allows you to see the person more clearly and make wise decisions.
And what about rejection? That's an inevitable part of dating, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately. But
Mm.
remember, not every date will lead to a relationship, and that's okay. It doesn't diminish your worth or mean you're not worthy of love. Don't take it
No.
personally.
So resilience is key. It's about bouncing back from disappointment and continuing to put ourselves out there.
Exactly. And most importantly, surround yourself with a supportive community. Talk to trusted friends, family members, or mentors about what you're going through. They can offer encouragement, perspective, and prayer.
That's such a valuable reminder. We don't have to go through this alone. God has given us people to walk alongside us on this journey.
And remember, God sees you. He knows your heart,
Hmm.
and He has a plan for your life, even if it doesn't look like what you expected.
That's a comforting thought. It's about surrendering our desires to God and trusting that He knows what's best for us, even when we don't understand His timing.
Beautifully said. And even if the dating journey is longer or more winding than you hoped, God can use it to shape your character, deepen your faith, and prepare you for a love that's even greater than you can imagine.
Wow, that's a powerful message. It takes the pressure off of finding the one and reframes it as a journey of growth and discovery, both in ourselves and in our relationship with God.
That's exactly it. It's about embracing the process, trusting God's plan, and becoming the best versions of ourselves along the way. Who knows? Maybe while we're busy focusing on our own growth and seeking God's will, we'll bump into someone special who's on a similar journey.
I love that it takes the focus off of the destination and puts it on the journey on becoming the right person, not just finding the right person.
That's the key. And I think that's a great reminder for all of us, whether we're single, dating, or married. The journey is just as important as the destination.
Well said. This has been such an insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this has been encouraging and helpful for our listeners as they navigate their own journeys of faith and love.
I have a feeling it will be. And for our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you most from this deep dive? What questions do you still have about trusting God's plan in relationships? Share your thoughts on social media using hashtag #TheDeepDive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep trusting our